I'll just start by introducing myself. I'm Jackie with Hub City Bookshop, and we're all zooming in virtually with Dr. Terry Barr, and very excited to have him. I will introduce him in a minute, and then he's going to read and talk about his book for a little bit, and then we'll open up for audience questions. So be thinking about any questions or comments or anything that you'd like to mention. I will ask people to put the questions or comments in the chat, and I will voice those questions just so make sure not to interrupt the author at any point. And anything else, if you have problems logging in or you know someone who's having problems logging in, just have them respond to one of the Eventbrite emails, and I will be on my email helping people get in if there's any problems. So thanks for that, and we're going to do a quick introduction. So Terry Barr is a professor of English and creative writing at Presbyterian College in Clinton, South Carolina, and the author of Don't Date Baptists and Other Warnings from My Alabama Mother, a collection of nonfiction essays centered on his hometown of Bessemer, Alabama. His essays have been published in such journals as the Museum of Americana, Blue Lyra Review, Steel Toe Review, Bell Reeve Literary Journal, and South Writ Large, amongst many others. His essay, A Big Ass Pot of Blended Soup, was nominated by Red Truck Review for the Best of the Net Award in 2015. He lives in Greenville, South Carolina with his wife, 2 daughters, and their beloved pets, Morgan and Max. And we are very happy to be talking about his newest book of essays, Secrets I'm Dying to Tell You. And I think he has a copy of it over there. There we go. Lovely book. And we're so excited to be talking about this today. Thanks again, Terry, for joining us. And I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Jackie. I know I keep seeing things pop up that people are trying to get in and can't. So I think if they're just patient, they're going to be able to get in. So I'll talk slowly as this begins, so maybe everyone can catch up. First of all, thank you and Hub City Books for hosting this event. I love going to Hub City Books. I used to go to Spartanburg a little more often than I do now, but I'd always go by the bookstore. And it's one of the great independent bookstores in the country. So I just can't thank you enough for having me. And you've also hosted me before. I don't think you were there, but it's always been fun reading at Hub City. And Jackie said they're going to start doing some live events in September. So it's good to know that's coming, even as kind of frightening as our world still is. I'm going to read an essay that I've never read before to anyone except my family. Some of you I know have read it. In fact, I see my friend Les White sitting there, and I know he read it because he gave me plenty of ideas and helped me shape it into the essay that I'm glad to know has turned out as it did. I did a lot of research on this essay. It was originally published in Story South, which is a great journal out of Greensboro, North Carolina. And for my research, I dug deeply into my hometown and some of the things that had been going on that I didn't know much about. And so I want to tell you a couple of things about this before I read. One, I wrote the essay in late 2016, early 2017, and then it was published in the summer of 2017. So you'll understand that it sounds a little dated when I make certain references. For instance, my mother was still alive when the essay was published. And as I think most of you know, she passed in 2018. And so that's one thing that I wanted to say about it. Some of the research that I did helped me understand more about organizations in the South. And I was surprised to discover some of the writers who were also writing for newspapers back at that time, as you'll see. The other thing I have to say, and this is more as a warning, I will be quoting some of my sources exactly. And to do that, I'm using the language that they use. These aren't words that I would use, but I feel like in order for you to get the real flavor and understand what life was like and how concerning things were for me and many others when I was growing up, that I need to cite all this information as it was stated. So the last thing that I'll say is I had the privilege at Presbyterian College where I teach to do a seminar with 4 students. It was their idea, actually. So a student came up to me and said she really had enjoyed reading a novel. I don't remember which one it was, but it was political Southern fiction. And so I said, well, we could look at this further if you want to. And she said, yeah, we could do an independent study. And the next thing I knew, 3 other students said, can we do the independent study too? I said, well, it's not really an independent study anymore, but we can certainly do it. And so we read several books that were looking at the South from the 1930s to today. And in one of those books, if we hadn't read this book, and I'll mention it in the story, that I wouldn't have known what I found out. And so this is one of those great moments where a teacher never really knows what he or she might learn if it weren't for the students who are also eager to learn. And so because these students wanted to do some work independently in this kind of literature, I was able to discover some things I didn't know and to write this essay. Okay, I think that's all I need to say. This is a long essay and I'm not going to read it all. I'm only going to read part of it. The essay is called Moose Park. And if you haven't read this yet, then this will be the great tease where you will have to get it for yourself, get the book for yourself and read on your own to find out how the story is going to end. Okay, here we go. Moose Park. She walked into my office like she was walking onto a stage, which made sense given that she was a performer, a concert pianist at her young age. She wore splints on both forearms from the wrist to 3/4 up the elbow. Carpal tunnel syndrome, she said before I could ask. She sat down across from me, ready to interview for an academic scholarship at Presbyterian College. We had 20 minutes together, and though we spent the allotted time, I remember only these things. She played well enough to work with orchestras and give city recitals. She had high cheekbones, feathered brown hair, was tall, and could have been a beauty queen. And she was born and raised in Forsyth County, Georgia. This was winter, 1989, and Oprah and Hosea Williams and hundreds of peaceful demonstrators had been and gone from Forsyth for a year. Oprah had filmed her TV show from the county seat, Coming, where among other testifiers, she heard this from a longtime county resident. I live down in Atlanta. It's nothing but a rat-infested slum. They don't care. They just don't care. Asked if he meant the entire black race, the man said no, just the niggers. When Winfrey raised an eyebrow and asked, what is the difference to you? The man offered to help her understand the distinction. You have blacks and you have niggers, he said. Black people, they don't want to come up here. They don't want to cause any trouble. That's a black person. A nigger wants to come up here and cause trouble all the time. That's the difference. Many in the audience applauded as Winfrey lowered the mic to her side and simply stared into the camera. I knew that the Klan had marched recently in Forsyth, and I knew that it had brought national attention on this county, which was only 2 hours south of my home in upstate South Carolina. I knew things there were bad, but I didn't know how bad. So when I asked the young woman sitting before me, who was hoping that I would give her high enough marks to increase her chances of getting a full scholarship worth about $140,000, when I asked her what it was like to live amidst the tensions and troubles of Forsyth, she looked at me quite placidly and said, well, it's the media that have blown everything out of proportion and caused all this trouble. Yes, the Klan marched, but it was no big deal. It's really a good place to live. Okay, what did I know about her home county? I'm originally from Bessemer, Alabama, itself once home to one of the most violent Klan chapters in the South. I grew up in the George Wallace era, and I wouldn't want anyone judging me or my intellectual capabilities based on Bessemer or Alabama in general. I wouldn't want any outsider believing that Wallace and the Klan's vitriol against the black race defined me or my family and friends. So we moved on to other topics. In the end, I gave her a decent recommendation, but not the highest. I don't know if she was offered any sort of scholarship or what else happened to her that day or any other day. She never enrolled in our college. Though I didn't believe her when she tried to minimize the effects of her home county's racial intolerance, I didn't know until I read Patrick Phillips' account of Forsyth, Blood at the Root, that the county went further than merely lynching Black men back in the early part of the 20th century. It cleansed itself of all Black people, a cleansing that held from 1913 to the early 1990s. Reading Philip's study, I learned about a world I thought I understood, being, as I said, a native Southerner who has lived in the shadow of race my entire life. For 80 years, no Black person set foot in Forsyth County without being run off, shot at, stoned, and I don't know, nor does anyone else, how many were actually killed. Over the decades since our brief time together, I've often remembered that young woman. I especially think of her each winter when Scholarship Day rolls around. And last fall, when I read Blood at the Root for the first time, I thought of her again, especially when I got to a passage quoting Forsyth County Commissioner David Gilbert in 1987. The first peace march to protest the county's segregated life had just ended, with the marchers being jeered at, threatened with bricks and guns, and then urged by the local police to reboard their buses because their lives could no longer be protected from the gathered white mob that was ready to do anything, it appeared, to keep Forsyth County racially pure. Gilbert claimed that the men who'd attacked African American peace marchers were all from outside the county, despite the fact that 7 of the 8 men arrested that day had Forsyth addresses. The real thing that upsets me, Gilbert told reporters, is that this whole thing was sprung by outsiders. It's just a bunch of outsiders trying to start trouble in Forsyth. Forsyth had claimed for 80 years that it was outsiders, people living in other nearby counties, who had caused all the trouble, who had forced Black landowners out of their homes and out of the county. The law of Forsyth County thought, when it lynched 2 Black men, one of them a boy of 15 back in 1912, for attacking and killing a young white woman, that it had solved the crime, though another attack with a similar MO occurred after these 2 were already in custody. The true culprit was never brought to justice, but what did occur in the years just after the lynching was that a concerted band of night riders terrorized and ran off the Black people of the county and some of the whites who sympathized with their fellow human beings. This band would eventually organize itself into the second wave Ku Klux Klan, and its descendants were dwelling in all-white Forsyth 6 decades later, and according to news sources, proud of it. As I keep thinking about these issues, I wonder what that young woman saw and heard in her Forsyth years. Did she truly believe that her home was a healthy one, a peaceful one that practiced the standards of freedom and justice and Christian goodwill to all? That the races must be separated according to scripture or some other distorted idea? When we spoke, was she protecting others' views, the views of people she loved, those of the family she was born into? Was she succumbing to neighborhood peer pressure? Her story, her defensiveness, her reaction still haunt me. I understand her conflict, her defensiveness. I know the shame and rationalizing that come from seeing your hometown's name in cold, brutal print. As I write this, again back in 2017, 2 days ago, a white man named James Harris Jackson from Baltimore murdered a Black man, Timothy Kaufman, in New York City using a military-type sword. The murderer told the police that he, quote, has hated Black men since he was a kid, unquote, and is, quote, particularly offended by Black men sleeping with white women. The attorney for the murderer stated that if the charges and statements by his client are true, then he has, quote, obvious psychological issues, unquote. Jackson told police that if he hadn't been caught, he would have kept on killing. The New York prosecutor is considering whether, along with murder, to charge Jackson with an act of terrorism. This comes from the New York Times, March of 2017. Along with my horror and sadness upon reading this story, I'm transfixed by the defense attorney's simple statement about his client's obvious psychological problems. I don't disagree. Blind hatred of Black men, a lifelong hatred, is a sign of sickness, of someone who has been damaged either intentionally or perhaps unintentionally. We know that such hatred is learned behavior. White men are not born with a natural organic hatred of Black men. White men are not born with an instinct to hate Black men who especially want to be with white women. Such thinking seems a vestige of the past, something we shouldn't expect in our quote unquote post-racial society. My problem, though, is that I was born in 1956, raised in Bessemer, Alabama, a suburb of Birmingham during the civil rights years. Thinking about the case in New York today, my question is, where were the attorneys in my home state, my hometown? Why didn't they publicly proclaim that the city fathers who directed our lives, the neighborhood fathers who pumped our footballs, who handled our bank accounts, who stewarded our church or sold us our furniture, be arrested or institutionalized because, given their views and teachings about the Black race, those fathers were obviously psychologically problemed? This semester, I'm leading a seminar focusing on Southern political literature. My students have read All the King's Men, which we discussed in relation to the rise of our current political leadership. Then we turn to Lawrence Leamer's The Lynching, which recounts the Alabama KKK's hanging of a young Black male, Michael Donald, in the early 1980s. Leamer provides a historical context for the brutal murder, showing Klan activity back in the 60s, and particularly focusing on the Klan reaction to the March on Selma, the second successful march. Reading this harrowing story, I reached the passage where Leamer describes Imperial Klan wizard Bobby Shelton's appearance at Birmingham's Eastview Claver number 13, one of the most violent Klan chapters in the country. Present on this evening was, quote, the next most important person at the meeting, exalted Cyclops of the Bessemer Clavern and the Grand Dragon, or top UKA officer in the state, Robert Creel. For much of my life, I've known that there was a Klan presence in Bessemer. My mother's told me often of the sign on Bessemer's superhighway, US Highway 11, leading from Bessemer to Birmingham, at the city limits next to Civitans and Lions and Rotarian signs. The one sign that welcomed everyone to Bessemer on behalf of the United Klans of America. It was just a small sign, she says, maybe even hand painted. It was right next to one of those train trestles out there. I don't know how long it stood or when it was taken down, but it was sure there a while. While to my knowledge, I never saw that sign, I have seen photographs of a Klan march right through the main artery of downtown Bessemer, 19th Street. The photo is somewhere in Bessemer's Hall of History today. Also on the 19th Street of my boyhood, next to a pure gasoline station owned by Mr. Bradley, who used to pump my mother's gas and who often gave her $1's worth when she could only afford 50 cents, was a barbecue joint run by an old trembling white man whom everyone called Pop Green. I went to this place only once in my life when I was a junior high kid with friends who wanted a sandwich. I had no money and maybe one of my friends bought me a Coke. It doesn't matter though, and maybe this fact doesn't either. But on the slightly faded neon sign out front, the place was not called Pop Greens or even just Greens. It was Creel's Barbecue. There could have been many Bessemer Creels though. I've asked a few people if they remember the sign, but so far it seems it's only my memory. I reported all of this to my students, asking if they understood how strange it feels to know certain facts that no one else remembers, to know secrets through hearsay and gossip, but to finally see them being revealed in print, secrets connected to your hometown and to the Klan, and how strange it is to wonder not if you knew any Klansmen, but rather how many you might have known. I know what you mean, one of my students responded. I've lived in Forsyth County my entire life. I knew there was racial strife in the county's past, but it looks like any other town now. There's even a Starbucks, another sort of branding. We all looked at each other then, wondering. And then it got stranger. On pages 141 and 2 of The Lynching, Leamer refers to a KKK rally in Bessemer on Saturday night, May 11th, 1963. Imperial Wizard Bobby Shelton spoke at this rally, and later that night, some of these same Bessemer Klansmen participated in the planning and bombing of the A.G. Gaston Motel in Birmingham, hoping to kill one of the tenants there, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who fortunately wasn't in his room at the time. 1963 was such a year. Just a month after the KKK rally, Governor Wallace stood in the University of Alabama schoolhouse door attempting to keep the campus segregated. 4 months after this bombing, another, larger bomb would go off in the basement of the 16th Street Baptist Church in downtown Birmingham, killing 4 Black children. 2 months after that, President Kennedy would be assassinated in Dallas. I was only 7 then, but I was very aware of the president's assassination and funeral. However, I have no distinct memory of the day those 4 little girls were killed at all. Nor do I remember that in my hometown of Bessemer, on an almost summer night, 2,500 people gathered for a Klan rally. But maybe 2,500 people didn't attend the rally, as Leamer said. For according to a reporter at the scene writing for the New York Herald Tribune, there were about 200 hooded and gowned men on hand and about 900 to 1,000 spectators in street dress. This was from an article entitled "Klan Meeting Dull in Spite of Crosses," reprinted in the Birmingham News on May 13, 1963. The reporter of the story would go on to write other articles about the civil rights actions in Birmingham and throughout the South. He would later write a few novels. The most famous of them was called True Grit. However, Charles Portis's story on the Bessemer Klan rally was a curious one. The headline proclaiming the rally dull was funny enough. Portis elaborated in the opening paragraph. A Ku Klux Klan meeting, for all its cross-burning and hooded panoply, is a much duller affair than one might expect. The hooded Klan rally here on Saturday night, just before the bombings in Birmingham, limped along for 3 hours of nothing but Kennedy jokes and invocations of divine guidance. The rest of the story drips with sarcasm and Portis's brand of semi-sarcastic, down-home Southern yarn-telling charm. He speaks of the honored guests, the grand dragons of Georgia and Mississippi, and ends the account with this almost whimsical detail. By 10:30 p.m., one of the crosses had collapsed and the other was just smoldering. Everyone drifted away and the Grand Dragon of Mississippi disappeared grandly into the southern night, his car engine hitting on about 3 cylinders. Reading Portis's story caused me to want to see who else had accounted for this rally. So I hauled down Diane McWhirter's Carry Me Home from my top study shelf. In research taken from FBI and secret informant files, she goes into greater detail, including the barbecue and beer at this, the first Klan rally in North Alabama in some 8 months, as well as the speeches from Shelton and others. And then she suggests that the menacing words of blue gum niggers and blessings on Wallace and Birmingham Police Commissioner Bull Connor reached several thousand pairs of ears that night. Of course, nothing much was whimsical, but everything was pretty vile on this night in my hometown, whether the crowd was 4,000, 2,500, or just over 1,200. Perhaps worse, on the same Monday that Portis's story was published, the New York Times folded the Bessemer KKK rally into the larger story of the Gaston Motel bombing and its aftermath. The Times headline, though, is curious. 50 hurt in Negro rioting after Birmingham blast. That was May 13, 1963. This was curious because back then, it seemed, it was the rioting and not the bombing that the powers that be considered more pernicious. I don't want to debate journalistic bias, however. What truly intrigues me about these stories is their stated location of the KKK rally in Bessemer. Portis claims that it was held, quote, in a well-kept little roadside park, a gift to the city of Bessemer from the Loyal Order of Moose. Moose Park, they call it. The Times writer Claude Sitton, however, reports that the rally occurred in Moose Lodge on the city's outskirts near suburban Bessemer. I've checked other documented sources and Moose Park seems to be the consistent designated site. McWhirter calls it Moose Park too. This is fine. Except as a native of Bessemer, I've never heard of Moose Park, nor can I determine if Bessemer's Moose Lodge existed or where it was. I've asked not only local Bessemerites, including my mother, but I've also checked with the Bessemer Public Library, the Birmingham Public Library, and the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute. No one knows where Moose Park is, or if it ever existed. But if it didn't exist, where were Charles Portis, Bobby Shelton, and the Grand Dragons of Mississippi and Georgia and Texas standing on that May night 54 years ago? Were they in Bessemer or on the outskirts? And if they were within the city limits, how close or far away were they from my family home? Wherever it was, what in that park's atmosphere carried through town? What did we all breathe in? What metastasized in our systems, causing us to either hate or ignore our fellow men? So far, no one that I know of except me seems bothered by this missing park. I ask on the Fond Memories of Bessemer Facebook page if anyone remembers Moose Park or Bessemer's Moose Lodge. People keep telling me that I must mean the Elks, and I assure them that I know the difference. Everyone knows where the Benevolent Protective Order of the Elks Club was located, I say. It shared a building with a children's ballet studio where my first girlfriend, Mary Jane, and her sister, Margaret Lou, used to practice on Mondays and Thursdays. Right on 4th Avenue on the other side of Highway 150, but that wasn't the Moose Club. Another funny detail. McWhirter describes Bobby Shelton's speech at the Klan rally as having the tone of a Lions Club meeting. Why didn't she use the moose for a reference? People are quick to try to help. My childhood friend Freddie, whose father was a Shriner but no moose, sends me an article, but it's only a truncated version of the sit-in article above. An old girlfriend, Vicki Vincent, someone I didn't treat as well as I should have back in high school, contacts the Bessemer Hall of History and another history source at Tanny Hill State Park. No luck. But I'm going to keep trying, buddy, she tells me. This is fun. If it ever did, Bessemer, I discover, no longer has a Moose Lodge, the closest order now being in nearby Midfield, chartered in 2010. I think of contacting that lodge, but the lead seems tenuous. I know that I need to go back to Bessemer, perhaps to look in old city directories in the library. My friend Joe, Mary Jane's older brother, thinks Moose Park might be situated in the McNeil area of Bessemer, and he offers to drive me there the next time I visit. We can find it, he says, and I feel reassured, though he doesn't remember anything about such a place, so perhaps this is just another reason for us to drive somewhere, an activity we engaged in frequently back in the old summers when we needed to escape evening TV. Now I'm even doubting my sources. Was someone feeding McWhirter, Portis, Lemur, and Sitton a line about the loyal moose? But then, in Gary May's account of the Klan killing of Viola Liuzzo, the informant, there it is again. The Bessemer KKK rally in Moose Park. What do all of these outsiders know that the rest of us who live there don't? Perhaps they know more than just the same Bessemer Klan members' names, Robert Creel, Eugene Thomas, and E.O. Eaton. May, at least, knows about events like Klansmen using chains and blackjacks wrapped in fishing line to beat Black people at the 1962 Carnival in downtown Bessemer, celebrating Bessemer's 75th anniversary, the Diamond Jubilee. Reportedly, when a Bessemer policeman discovered the beating, he called one of the Klansmen, who happened to be FBI informant Gary Thomas Rowe, a dumb shit and told him to wait a minute. The officer then called another cop to take the Klansman to an area where 6 popcorn crates were being kept, each containing a multitude of clubs, bats, guns, where the officer encouraged the Klansmen to store their weapons until needed. When the signal comes down, the officer advised, you can take the weapon out of the popcorn box and do whatever you want to do. No one I talk to remembers this act of violence. They do remember that for the Jubilee itself, our fathers grew beards and wore tasseled bow ties as throwbacks to Bessemer's founding age. I think I remember this carnival. The intersections of 2nd and 3rd Avenues at 19th Street were closed off. There were rides, maybe even a Ferris wheel. Joe remembers sawdust strewn on the streets, and I believe I saw this spectacle, but did I? Did my family take a chance during these troubled times of letting us have fun on our still segregated but increasingly dangerous city streets. I was only 6 then, and so whatever violence they learned of, I'm sure my parents kept it from me. Also mentioned in May's book are Klan hangouts in our town, Lorene's Cafe and the Barn. I'm troubled by all these scenes, locations, stories, because until now, I've known little to nothing about them. Until now, I've allowed my past to be sanitized by those who loved and protected me. And for too long, I've participated in the sanitizing. Now I want to know, where are these places and where did the Klansmen live? How close were they to my family and to other people I knew? To what degree did they infiltrate my life? Will discovering these sites bring my world into focus? Will it allow me to quit apologizing, quit denying, and own my past? So that's where I'm stopping. Like I said, if you want to know more about the journey, you have to read the story.
That was wonderful. Thank you, Terry.
You're so welcome.
Really, it's different experience listening to you reading it than it is reading it myself, obviously. I just read that one today. So it's really great to listen to you read it. We are open for audience questions if anyone has a question. If you want to ask aloud, just send a note to me in the chat and I can unmute you. Do you want to talk a little bit about how long you've been working on this collection?
Well, the collection itself, I probably worked on for 2 years. So what I normally, excuse me, my process is to write random essays as they occur to me based on things like students wanting to know these kind of stories. And then I try to get them published, usually in some literary journal. And then the idea will occur to me about how to form a number of those essays into a book. And so this book was all predicated on secrets. And some of the other stories in the collection deal with, well, not to tell stories on my family, but when my mother was dying, she was like a week away from dying. My daughters in the hospital said, "Grandma, tell us the strangest thing that ever happened to you." And I about died on the spot because I thought my mother was uncensored anyway, but as she approached death, she was probably going to say anything. And so she told a story that I think maybe I'd heard it somewhere in the past, but had not really listened to. And this story was so horrifying that I had to write about it. And it had to do with her being a teenager and being accosted and nearly being raped. And so most of the stories in this book are definitely on the darker side. Those of you who know me are not surprised at that probably, but my wife keeps saying, write some funny stories. Like, okay, I'll try.
Well, sometimes these are the ones that need to be told. Oh, sorry, Jim, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just, yes, buddy, the secrets you're dying to tell, you're not going to do a second edition that deal exclusively with high school, are you?
I'm going to do one that deals exclusively with you.
Oh, well, you can get a few pages out of that, I think. Yes. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
We talk by email and text a lot, but I can see your face. That's great.
So as I look on the screen, I know I've got friends from Bessemer. I've got friends from grad school. I've got students that I've taught down at Presbyterian College, and some of my colleagues and my medium friends, and then good friends in Greenville are here. I can't see the whole screen, so I know I'm leaving a few of you out.
I'm so glad you have some people you recognize, lots of good supporters, and you've got some great comments in the chat too about how much they appreciated your reading, from Linda, from Jim, and from Kendra.
So my friend Joe is up here too. And Joe, I'll just, not to give anything else away, but when I did go home, Joe was so instrumental in helping me find, we rode all over Bessemer one afternoon looking for things. And I would have given up one time for sure when we were looking for a Klansman's house that I just had to find. You know, when you start doing this kind of research, you've got to see the results of it. So we were almost stymied, and I write about this in the book. We got to a point where they had built the interstate right through this neighborhood that we were looking for, and we drove down something like Short 16th Street or whatever, you know, there are all these crazy things. And we hit the interstate, and I thought, oh God, they must have destroyed the house. And Joe, because he's this kind of person, said, no, we're not giving up. And he drove us around, and we managed to actually find the place, but he wouldn't give up. And he knew how to get around and maneuver through this interstate and all the streets that have been torn up. So good shout out to him. You can't you can't do essays like this without help, for sure.
I love that you included a little bit of that in the essays as well, like some of you mentioned in a couple of them who helped you find the information. Also, I think Kendra has a question. I see your hand raised. Do you want to voice that out loud, Kendra? Or maybe she raised her hand.
Guys, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hey, Kendra.
Hey, how you doing, Terry? So Terry, your essay it really, really struck home with me in so many different ways. And you've been doing this really, intense and brave work with your students at Presbyterian College. I know, this kind of examination of race and sort of the, and through your own experience and also through literature. And I've had some really interesting conversations lately with other Southern writers in different settings in which people talk about how much difficulty this particular generation of white Southern writers seems to be having in having frank discussions of race. I had a conversation that was recounted to me by an African-American writer who was talking about, conversations that he has about nature writing with his, white compatriots, and how they really shrink and shy away from those kinds of conversations in their writing, and, how he tries to challenge them. And so I'm just wondering, what is your observation of the state of Southern writing right now? I mean, we went through, of course, in the history, that great wrestling with race that came out of Faulkner and all those, writers of that generation. But then there did seem to be, a period that, in which people were very much sort of like in writing from their own experience and not necessarily writing across the color line. So what do you think is happening?
Well, I wish you had sent me this question earlier today, so I'd be better prepared with all.
I'm sorry. I thought I had missed it. I thought it was yesterday.
I know. I'm glad you're here. I think I'm going to get these names right, but if I miss them, you'll forgive me. I know one that I'm going to get right is one of the great contemporary authors right now is Attica Locke, and she writes. So I'm saying this basically from Southern Gothic point of view, because I teach a course in Southern Gothic at PC. So Attica Locke is an African-American woman who writes, her stories are mainly set in Louisiana and in Texas. And she's got a number of protagonists. And one of her protagonists is an African-American woman police officer and now detective. And so I really like her stories because she examines what racial animus has done to both races and how its repercussions and convulsions still affect people today who can't trust someone. And it's a double bind for her because she's not trusted as a cop. She's not trusted in either the white or the black community because she's a cop. And then her race comes into play too. She's also got a male protagonist, African-American male protagonist, who's more of a private detective in her other series. So I think she's doing an excellent job in looking at how it feels to be beleaguered in our current day, just simply trying to do your job and to live your life. I think the other author is either his name is either S.A. Cosby or S.L. Cosby. Whoever wrote Blacktop Wasteland is the other author I wanted to reference, who again is African American, and his second novel has just come out, and he's trying to write again what it's like to have to live with, as an African American male, and his protagonist is African American, having to live with the legacy of people being suspicious of you just because of who you are. And then the novel, Blacktop Wasteland, is so good because his protagonist gets into deep shit, basically, in trying and thinking he can compete with some of the other lawless individuals of his place. And so what I love about these authors is they're kind of in the tradition of Walter Mosley. They're trying to take African-American protagonists and putting them into situations that we can relate to, just because we live in an era where economically speaking, we are still under the thumb of many people and don't know what to do about it. And so I think it's kind of like when I wrote years ago about Jewish gangsters, and no one knew anything about Jewish gangsters, and the Jewish people I knew, why would you want to write about us in that way? I said, because it humanizes us and it quits making us seem like we're some kind of alien force. We can be gangsters too, so we're all equal. So the Black protagonist in these stories, I think, help us to see that we are all struggling to get by. And sometimes, well, look, let's face it. Do you cheat on your income taxes?
That's a rhetorical question, right?
White collar crime. So, if we just start talking about all our own problems and the commonalities of those problems, but I know it's difficult to talk about race. It still is. It's difficult to talk about gender. It's difficult to talk about poverty when you don't know your audience, and sometimes, especially when you do know your audience.
Right. I think that I thank you for those book recommendations. I'm gonna check them out. But hey, I think what I was trying to get at was that there seems to be a fear among white writers to grapple with race, and you're fearless. And I want to praise you.
I was about to say I'm not a white writer, but apparently I am.
Oh, Jewish. Sorry. Well, do you think that gives you a special advantage in certain ways?
I just think I'm trying to write the conversations that I wish I'd had. So it's in some ways it's easier to write because when you're in the act of writing, of course, you're a solitary person just writing for whatever. And then if it's good enough, you can put it out there and see what happens. And I did get a message earlier today. I can't tell you who gave me the message, but assuring me that many people joined the Klan right after World War II because it was just another social organization. And to get anywhere in politics, you had to. And I know that's true. I know that is true, depending on where you are. This person said his father got out of the Klan pretty quickly when he discovered how violent they were. And, I don't want to belittle anyone, but I thought, so you didn't know the Klan was violent, and even in the late 40s, but no, I guess experience tells us something. But to go back to what you were saying, for me, I have to write it because I missed, or I wasn't brave enough to have conversations when I could have, high school, college, whatever. So I'm still trying to have those conversations. And I think this is the starting point for me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kendra, for your question. We have a couple other questions. I'm going to try to get to everybody. Jim has his hand raised. So Jim, would you like to go first?
Oh, this Jim.
No, I think it was a different Jim. Sorry.
Which was it, the Sepulveda Jim, or was it the
Sepulveda Jim? Sorry.
All right, here we are.
Sorry, other Jim.
Student Jim Sepulveda.
That's right, Dr. Barr. I guess we can call you Terry now. I don't have to call you Dr. Barr in this. All right, 18 years.
5 years old now, or what?
Only 40. Well, hey, it's great to see you. Great to hear you read again. It's been 18 years. And I'm just getting back into your literature. So forgive me if this is something you covered the first 10 minutes when I was getting into the meeting, or if I just haven't gone through your library yet, but have you written or do you plan on writing about kind of the area in which you educate now, right? The whole Clinton area has got a unique history, and the Lawrence County area has a unique history as well. I want to say unique, perhaps not too unique that area, but I live in Austin, Texas now, so you know it's very different from where we went to college, right? But what are your thoughts on that, and also around how your students change or interactions that you've had? I'm sure that the class that I graduated from in 2003 is very different than ones you're about to revisit here in the next week or so, right? So interested to hear, whether or not you have written or you plan to write on those two items.
I'm going to just kind of backtrack from the second question. The students, well, like this particular group of students, so most students aren't aware, it seems, at the college they can do these independent studies if they want to. And so when you make them aware of it, they get excited. And so what I really love about our students is that we have enough independent-minded people who are willing to take on these kind of studies and explore something that they just don't see in their ordinary curriculum. But that's been true ever since I've taught at the college. I can't say students have changed. They have in more of a sociological way, I guess, and in some of the standards that we use. But I have taught bright students from day one at Presbyterian College and continue to do so, and just love it. I've had another honors student last semester. I'm hoping to have one this coming year if we can get a proposal and everything all together. So I love teaching them because while some of them come from backgrounds a little different from my own in our classes, as you know, the greatest thing about it is they're willing to engage in discussion and to just be frank and open. So as far as writing about this, it's really difficult to want to write about the place where you work. And
I assume that'd be tricky. Yeah.
I do want to write about the place that I work. Let me put it that way.
The town, the county, not the college. Right?
So this may have gotten into a story at some point, but one of the funniest things that happened to me, funny in this harrowing Ku Klux Klan kind of way, is that my first year at the college, I went to this little place to eat by myself. And I come back and I tell my department chair, Neil Prater, well, I just ate at so-and-so's restaurant. And he said, oh, that's a Klan hangout. And I'm going, well, no, you didn't put that in my orientation information. And I think that is something you should have told me, frankly, but I got my cheeseburger and everything was fine. I was not looked at. I did have really long hair back then, so that could have been a dangerous situation. So there are things like that and some others, but I'm not going to write much about the college until another 5 years have passed and I retire.
Sure. Thank you, sir.
They can't hurt me. You're welcome, Jim. It's so good to have you here, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's good to see you too, sir. And great to hear you again. Great writing. I look forward to receiving the book.
Thank you. Thank you.
Books did ship out today, by the way. And they are signed. Terry was gracious enough to drop off some signed copies for us. So a couple of questions in the chat, if you don't mind, Terry.
Sure.
Well, first I'll just read a couple of nice comments. Shannon says, I've missed listening to your stories so much. Tom said, great book. I enjoyed reading all the stories and many of the people and places are familiar to me. Thanks for sharing your secrets. Nilly has a great question related to the difficulty of talking about race, gender, and poverty. I wonder what it is like for you to use the direct racist language which you warned the audience about.
Yeah, that was my wife who just asked that question. Of course, no one can really get to you like your family. I don't like using that language, and it's always difficult because of the literature that I teach. I do a lot of Southern novels, from Faulkner to Flannery O'Connor to contemporary people, and those words are used and other things are said. But I think, as I said to you, Jackie, before we started, I think we should be alarmed by this language. It should always alarm us. It should alarm us that it's been used so cavalierly, so callously, so hurtfully. But I would hate to just gloss over it or omit it or edit it out, because while I'm all for taking down Confederate monuments that don't deserve to be in public places, or at least, owned by the city in public places, I think when we start exercising the language, we will miss the hurt that many of us have experienced and that have caused us to be as angry as we are, or as traumatized as we have been. So it's difficult, and I wish those words didn't exist in the form that they exist, but they do. And to pretend that they don't would also be to pretend that people didn't suffer from their use. That would be my answer. I'll ask my wife later on privately if that was okay. She's nodding, yeah.
She said she was a piece to add to my question. Hearing it makes me cringe, but I don't know what it's like for the writer or to the audience. Do you find when you talk about this that your audience reacts in the way that you want them to? Like shocked, unpleasantly surprised, needs to think about it more, however you'd like them to respond? Is that how they're responding when you use that?
I think so. Sometimes I almost feel like through whatever, if the computer screens or if we're live, sometimes I think I feel people cringing. I know it's really myself cringing, but it's really difficult. Some of the other things that I do teach in Southern Gothic. So for instance, there's a great novel by a Louisiana writer, M.O. Walsh. It's called My Sunshine Away, and I'm sure Up City has copies of it. Really, really great novel, but it is harrowing, and it's difficult. And I try to warn students, just like with this particular piece that I read, there are going to be some pretty horrible things that happen here, but I think we need to, and clearly if when I tell them what it is, if they don't want to read, that's fine. They should tell me, and I won't force them to do anything. But sometimes we need to know what we're capable of doing to each other in these ways so that we can learn from it and figure out how we can keep it from happening. We can't always keep it from happening, but we can surely understand, instead of ridiculing people or thinking people or whatever they are, that maybe the reason they're like they are is they've had something happen to them, like it's not the protagonist of My Sunshine Away, but the girl he loves. So I don't know, it's always difficult. This is why we teach. It's, if you've ever read Faulkner's Sanctuary, you'll miss the horrible thing that happens. Most likely everyone does. And so then you have to go tell people this is what happened up in that hayloft. But these things are real.
I do appreciate your book suggestions also. I have put all of those in the chat with links if anyone wants to continue researching maybe.
I see Lisa Frady has commented, Lisa Frady Davis, she was in one of my film classes a few years ago. I won't say how many.
Let's see. She mentioned you were her film studies professor, and one of my favorite classes there, I encouraged my 16-year-old son to register for the film criticism at his high school this year. And she just said she's excited to walk the path with him. And she also did not say how many years it's been, which is totally fine. So there's another message from David Heatherly. Thank you, Terry. I so enjoy hearing about your hometown. I hope more is to be revealed about Bessemer City. For sure, the city lives in you. Much love. And then Jennifer asked, have you tried contacting the city of Bessemer to find out more about the park and if it existed?
Yeah, I did try, Jennifer, to contact the city of Bessemer, and like all city governments everywhere, I got such conflicting information and I did write about that a little bit, that the one piece of factual information they gave me was completely wrong. So this might explain a lot about Bessemer, but Yeah, so, but the Bessemer Hall of History actually, and again, I'm not going to give anything away, but they were also instrumental to helping me figure this out. The two guys that worked there, one of them was I think the older brother of a guy I went to high school with. And it was so cool to be in there with them because just like anyone else in research, once you pose a question or a problem, like your great research librarians, they just got so excited. And I walked in there one day and said, God, we've gotten so many calls about where is Moose Park. I said, yeah, I'm afraid I'm responsible for that. But then they had to know too. And so we sat there pouring through city directories, trying to find and map out where this place was.
Thank you. Yeah, David also asked if you'd explored the Bessemer City Museum, so I'm assuming that you have at some point.
Thanks, David, and I love you.
So sweet. Then let's see. I think that's all the questions so far. We may have time for one more question, or if there's just something that you'd like to wrap up with, Terry.
Well, I did want to say again, I think you mentioned it, but Hub City has signed copies of the book that you can order. And if you don't have a copy already, that's certainly a great place to buy one. They are signed. I didn't, of course, get a chance to personalize them because I didn't know you were coming, but I hope that you will look at their website and not only get this book if you don't have it, but see what else you could order from them because they are just such a great bookstore and we're lucky. I live in Greenville, but it's only 25 minutes away to Spartanburg, and we're lucky to have this bookstore so close to us.
Thank you so much for that beautiful recommendation. We are honored to have you and to be able to host you today. And very excited to have your books in the shop. They're at the front in the display with the other event books. Very happy to have it there. And we don't have a lot of books on our website, but all of our event books are on our website. So I did put a link to this one in the chat for anyone who hasn't purchased one yet. And everybody who has, I sent them today. So you should get them within the next week at the latest, depending on where you live. I remember Jim's going to Texas, so that one might take a few days, but everybody else is pretty local. So much appreciated everyone who ordered a book and all of the amazing questions that we had from the audience today. It was just really a great discussion to listen in on. And Terry, you're just so thoughtful with your responses, and we really appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate your having me. And I am on Medium. A lot of you know that. So if you go to Medium and just search my name, I tend to write almost every day. You can read some free ones, but you do have to pay to join Medium at some point if you want to keep reading. But that's the best way to keep up with my writing at this point. Because it's the fastest way to get things out there and to establish audiences. And it is a lot of fun to write on Medium and to find your particular niche. So that's in this pandemic, Medium has been just one of the great saving graces, I think, for those of us who like to write and to have a writing community. So thanks again for having me, Jackie. Thanks to all of you for being here. This is cool.
We really appreciate it, and I hope you have a good rest of your vacation there, Terry, and we'll see you everyone next time.
Thanks, Dr. Barr. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Jackie.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Dr. Barr. Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close out the meeting. Thanks again, Terry. It was really great to have you.
All right.